Okay, so when you guys hear the word drone, you think of some malicious little robot that's just waiting to fly into an airplane or spy on your sunbathing neighbor. And while there isn't much evidence to support that, unfortunately lawmakers have the same view. And all across the country, there have been proposed legislation for different levels of regulation for unmanned aerial systems or drones. My claim is that these regulations burden a new industry and don't offer any extra protection from them. So, first of all, they're very difficult to enforce. Secondly, they're completely unnecessary, and finally, they burden a new industry that's bringing lots of money and jobs into the economy. So my first point, that it's very difficult to enforce. First of all, the parts for these things are everywhere. You can get them pretty cheaply in an afternoon in some YouTube videos. You can put one together and be in the air. So it's very difficult to set some kind of regulation when anyone can just build any kind of plane they want. Secondly, most of the regulations are software based. So there's no actual way to tell between something that completely complies with the law and something that does not. And finally, the local and state regulation creates what's referred to as a patchwork quilt of laws all over the country, which makes it very difficult to both follow and enforce, because if you're in one area at one time and then you go into a different area, all of a sudden all the rules change. That makes things difficult. Douglas Johnson said pretty much the same thing, that this patchwork will confuse both commercial operators and casual hobbyists, undercut federal and industry UAS safety initiatives, and damage entrepreneurs, startups, and job creation. And Douglas Johnson is the head of the Consumer Electronics Association and was on the board of was on the committee for federal regulation on unmanned aerial systems. Secondly, regulation is completely unnecessary. First of all, quadcopters, they're terrible for spying, because I don't know if you've ever been followed around by an angry bee's nest, but it's pretty conspicuous. I've tested this out, and to be reasonably undetected, you would have to be at least 400 feet away, which combined with a GoPro, you get far better images from Google Maps. They don't pose the risk that they're being reported of. The Mercatus Center at George Mason University did a study based on bird strike data, and they said we further estimate that 6.12 times 10 to the negative 8 collisions that cause injury or fatality to passengers on board an aircraft will occur every 100,000 hours of 2 kilogram UAS flight time, or once every 187 million years of operation. And this appears to be an acceptable risk to the airspace. Next, the vast majority of the near misses you hear on the news, you hear thousands of near misses reported, are misreported. They're either birds or something else. According to the Academy of Model Aeronautics, they looked at 764 reports of close calls and found that only 27 reports, or 3.5%, had some explicit notation of near miss or near collision with anything, including a bird. Most regulations in regard to their operation simply restate laws that are already illegal. You can't spy on people, and you can't crash and take down an airplane. It's illegal. Governor Brown shared this sentiment when vetoing the 3 separate sets of regulations, saying that these laws just find a new way to characterize things that are already inscribed, and there's no need for any further regulation on the thing. And finally, they have a negative economic impact because they burden. There's a lot of industrial possibilities for this industry, such as agriculture, mapping, and such stuff like that. The inclusion of unmanned aerial systems allows much cheaper, safer, easier operation, which will allow those industries to expand. And the actual U.S. industry is growing fairly rapidly as well. According to Business Insider, has a compound annual growth rate of 19% between 2015 and 2020. So in conclusion, having state and local regulations just creates a complicated mess of laws that doesn't really help and just kind of hurts the economy and the industry.
All right, well, I'm going to start on the third point, which obviously occurred in overtime. So you get to that particular point, we got the alarm going off. You went ahead. It wasn't that much overtime. You had 1 minute and 30 seconds, but that's a big chunk of the speech, so you want to be careful about that. I thought you did a good job citing some information on that particular point. It's we're not sure how many jobs or what kind of tax benefit there's going to be or what that economic activity consists of, but it does seem to suggest that there is a large potential there. The inference, though, that the restrictions are going to stow that in some way, I think are a little bit less convincing. And so you need to have a stronger link on how the regulations are going to hold down innovation or prevent people from doing these activities. You don't even really talk about what those restrictions happen to be. And in fact, if you're correct on the earlier point that Governor Brown says that all these rules are already in place anyway, then it seems to deny that that third argument would even happen. If we already have all these rules in place, and that's one of the reasons that we don't need them, then how are those rules going to have a negative effect on the industry. That seems like it's counterintuitive to the point that you're making. At the beginning, I thought you had a nice visualization of the term drone to get our attention. The proposition's identified, but it's in two parts, and that's always problematic. The contents is well previewed, so I thought you did a good job there. The idea of controversy, I think you could probably use an example or an experience where somebody had these issues, or maybe you could even talk about some of the regulations that are being imposed to demonstrate that this is, in fact, a big issue. It's very well organized. Like I said, although the third point is in overtime. For the most part, you're explaining concepts there, and you seem to know a lot about the subject. A little bit inconsistent on the source citations, but there are a few places where there are some source citations, and typically, of course, they're industry sources, so you might want to be looking for something that's a little bit less generated by the, it's like a defensive sort of information, and I think that that's a little bit problematic. I didn't really hear any much evidence about the notion about privacy. It's all a hypothetical example that you're dealing with there. The information about the danger to aviation, for instance, that I thought you did have a nice statistic on that explained it. Although a couple of the examples that you cite suggest maybe, I don't know how this is all being considered and how that information was generated, but it does suggest that we're getting awful close to our 187 million years or hours of risk that you're talking about there. Okay, thank you.